Good afternoon. My name is Elena Doyle, and I am going to talk to you today about Chapter 11, The Challenges of Deliberation and Participation by John Forrester. John Forrester transitions the focus to a more contemporary planning theory, which he focuses on communication, dialogue, and the dynamics of community input. His research into the micropolitics of the planning process, ethics, and political deliberation assesses the ways that planners shape participatory processes and manage public disputes in diverse settings. He also reminds us that planning is not just about finding meaning and articulating arguments, but also about taking action. He is currently a professor at Cornell University. Now let's look at some of his thoughts surrounding the challenges of deliberation and participation. So first, I wanted to just cover a breakdown of how I'm going to cover the topics. This is the flow of the chapter in the book, and at the end I will definitely make an attempt to leave each of you looking at a different and interesting way of how recent examples of holding public hearings or not holding them and the results of that. So of course the first section introduces the three central points that he's going to discuss in the chapter. The second section talks about the possibilities of integration with negotiation. The third section talks about public participation, and then the fourth section, discovering discursive processes. So the first section in the intro, Forrester outlines three central points that he will kind of go over and talk through over the next few pages. So the first point is that we need to integrate public participation with innovative and effective negotiations, and that comes out to be skillfully mediated agreements. The second point is public participation raises ambiguities in the meaning and argument. And then the third point, we have a great deal to learn about the public deliberation and democratic participation processes of pragmatic action rather than argument and argumentation. Let's look at his description of the possibilities of integration. Integrating with participation and negotiation. So the next couple of slides, we will go over that, and we'll talk about this matrix that he came up with. And it's at the top of page 208. He looked at the possibilities of integrating the participation with the negotiations. So we're going to look at each one a little closer. So the first possibility is little negotiations but substantial voice, and that's going to be public hearings. So the weak negotiations but high voice, high participation, that represents public hearings. The second possibility is little negotiations or weak negotiations and little participation. That's going to give you the bureaucratic procedure. So the third possibility is effective negotiations but minimal participation. And that definitely is deal making. And deal making really describes some decisions that have been made by the elites, or as he calls it, the old boys. And these deals are cut for some, with many left out. So the final possibility that he talks about is how to marry substantial participation, which would be that effective negotiations with definitely high participation. And he thinks that that is the best possible solution, which is mediated negotiations. So he thinks that, we should explore this possibility because we have recent work that teaches us about meeting these challenges via a collaborative problem solving or multi-stakeholder negotiations and consensus building. Sorry, I can't say that word. But that mainly, as the future generations come along, there is a lot more opportunity for this sort of participation within the public sector. So we have this way of looking at these this high participation, but also it's effective because there's no more lose-lose, but there can be win-win or some sort of compromise. So now let's look at public participation and what Forrester really thought of that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide just to kind of talk through everything and to talk about the ambiguities that he felt that public participation brings in. He believed that public participation makes us refrain from action because of the ambiguities we face when an individual discusses or presents a point. So there are three central questions we are conditioned to ask ourselves to judge whether or not we agree with the individual speaking or believe we should act as a result of what the individual is stating. And this information is also found on page 209. And in the example that he uses, he's talking about, I think it's Sarah Smith and her request to present, to ask for taxes, a tax increase for some sort of improvement. But the first question is, we ask ourselves, what is this individual, what is the individual suggesting? Does the evidence support him or her? And are their claims true? We also have questions of the fact of the matter in the argument at hand. So this raises the question of truth and refutation. So can I refute what they're saying? Another question that we ask, or the second question that we may ask ourselves when we're listening to this individual speak, is how does the individual's suggestions fit with or challenge the institutional context at hand? What are they really suggesting? Does this entity have the authority to do what they're suggesting? Does the political support exist to mandate the policy options they're discussing? Are their recommendations justified? And this raises the question of authority and justification. And then finally, it asks, what is he or she suggesting? Who in the world is this person to argue this? Is he or she just trying to get something for themselves at someone else's expense? Or, or is this more of, we have a question, less of argument and more of identity and reputation, and then sometimes the gendered politics as well. So is it a she, and why should she be the person representing this or taking this position, or he, what does he get out of it? Who is this person? But this really raises the question of self-motive and identity. So next we're going to look at mediators, and it's interesting that he talks about this role in this chapter, and there's a lot of information that he talks about. And on page 212 he discusses the differences between what a moderator could do versus a mediator. And honestly, when I first read this, I thought that he supported the moderators, but in a sense he really calls out the fact that mediators are the ones that are definitely going to be the way to go. And it's interesting because he has that role today. If you look at some of his go to his website and look up some of his things and his accomplishments, it does call out that he is a mediator. So the one thing that he wants to make sure we all remember is that, in all of these questions that we ask, because he does also talk about in that same area in the book, I think on page 210 or 211, why we're conditioned to think that way. So he's kind of bring it all together and state, missing in all of these questions is the critical assessment of what we can do together and how we might build a consensus to act together. Forrester now introduces the use of mediators to help with this process. So he starts to talk about how mediators bring practical judgments and wisdom to complex public disputes. And he also proposes a process where everyone wins when we devise discursive and conversational political processes and institutions that explore possible commitments so that we not only know the right things to do, but actually bring ourselves and one other to do those right things. So he says that mediators show us that we are likely to confuse some of these processes, dialogue, and what that looks like. We seek in dialogue to understand and the knowledge of the other person's viewpoint. In debate, we're seeking to establish or refute an argument. And in cooperation or negotiation, we're seeking agreement upon a course of action. And what he's saying is that moderators may fall short of pulling all of these things together. They may moderate a discussion. They may facilitate dialogue. But what we're trying to get is that everybody moves toward a course of action throughout this conversation. So there's a saying that the one way to starve a dog is to tell two people to feed the dog. So in a sense, that's what he's saying, is that we have to get to a place where we are going to go through all of this conversation and have this dialogue and come to some sort of collaborative effort to make sure that all parties involved benefit. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to briefly go over two examples of some things that I just really want you to take away as food for thought. So some of you may have heard about the Chicago Cubs Jumbotron and the history of that and the issues with that, but rich history, 99 years that this field or this stadium has been there, and now they want to add a 5,900 square foot sign. There was concerns for the citizens and the individuals who live around that area, the lighting and the impact that it would have on that. But there was also the Cubs who felt that if they get this, they can definitely make sure that they win more games, and then the revenues, etc., will increase and all that. The mayor totally supported this. So my question to you is, during this public hearing, which process was in place? Was it the high voice, weak negotiations? Do you think everyone was heard? And then the question that goes back to what we just talked about a couple of slides ago, what does the mayor gain here? That's the question. And that's what I want you to think about. So I placed a link at the bottom. Hopefully you have enough time to go through and copy that link down and go and review, or just Google it and look up the results of what happened. The next one is something that's a little bit more local. And I was surprised by this example, and I will read some information about the site. So you may have heard of, I'm going to pronounce it Viridian, but it's a community in Arlington, and there was a public hearing held on January 4th, but no one was present in support or opposition. And it's interesting that the site is located within a FEMA designated floodplain. It is a new sustainable community, and I put the website here for you to kind of look at that as well. But I think the key thing here was that in this community, they're making sure that each and every, I'll read an example. A Viridian homeowner manual has been developed on how to live green, which is given to every new homeowner to help Viridian's residents live green and be good neighbors with nature. So my question to you again would be, what did this process look like? The public was invited. There was a sign placed along the road, but no one showed up for the hearing. No negotiations. So who in turn will be impacted in this situation? Will it be the people who purchased their homes there, but it is located in a FEMA designated floodplain? What's really to consider here? And do we think that this process works? Thank you so much for your time.